We're sitting down with Peter Routledge, who is the Superintendent of Financial Institutions for Canada. He's just come off the stage here with his fireside chat, one of the opening sessions for NICC this year in 2023 in Montreal. And Peter, before we talk a little bit about some of the industry issues that we'd like to get into, what's your journey been to this role? What are some of the things that you thought about in the role before you got it, and compared to what you're doing with it now that you're deep into the role as superintendent?
Thanks for the question. Thanks, Peter, for having me. In terms of my background and my journey into the role, after business school, I worked for a little over 20 years in financial services in the private sector. I was a management consultant, I was a credit analyst, and then I was an equity analyst. About 6 years ago, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I'd long had a dream of joining the public service and doing something for my country. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, "It's now or never, brother."
Yeah, there you go.
And I managed to find an opportunity at the Department of Finance in Ottawa, and I worked there for a year and a half. And then the opportunity came up to compete for the role of President and CEO of the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation. And I thought I'd give that a shot. And I won the competition. I got the job. That was great. And then a few years into that job, the OSFI, the superintendent role came up, and I competed for that, and here I am. I think what has helped me in the public service is having 20 plus years in the private sector, working for consulting firms, for rating agencies, for banks, and understanding how the private sector works, and then understanding how to explain within the public service how private sector thinks about problems. Oftentimes, problem solving just comes down to understanding your counterpart. Being empathetic, and I've got 20 years experience on the other side of the fence, right. and my value add is that I can bring that appreciation to problem solving, and so far so good.
So good, yeah, and absolutely. So let's get into property and casualty sector of insurance. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we think about when it comes to national interests, and you talked about serving your country, and the insurance industry is designed to serve the country in times of peril and loss. What are some of your concerns right now when you look at the P&C sector on the bigger picture? You
think about the big threats, and the big threats are around catastrophes, which are, earthquake is a big issue. I think that the industry has been foresightful in terms of presenting the risk to the public and saying, here's what we're trying to do, and here's where we need help. Climate risk is increasing the frequency and intensity of natural disasters, and the industry's got to find a way to finance that. Natural disasters are going to create costs, and the industry's product is designed to absorb those costs that are sometimes abrupt and unexpected. And so the industry has to sort through the capital and the business model required in order to compete and provide that service to Canada right. in this environment. Related to that, we get a part of managing that risk is reinsurance. And related to that, we do get worried a little bit about unlicensed reinsurers, outside Canada. And we worry about collectability. We have a guideline B2 around that. We're always looking to make sure that the institutions we regulate are as attuned to that risk as we are. I think technology, digitalization of financial services, and the rise of artificial intelligence tools presents to the industry and to us challenges that come from disruptive technologies, right. And just what technologies are called disruptive when they disrupt business models, and I think we're in the first or second inning of a pretty disruptive period in financial services.
Can I ask you a question about when you use the term disruptive? Some of my past guests and people I've worked with in the insurance industry have talked about disruption as sort of the precursor to innovation, in that they look to innovate the industry by disrupting it. When you look at it, do you look at it as a threat vector to what the outcomes could be should something go wrong? Or is that more of the same along the lines of insurance of this is going to lead to innovation and change is positive?
As a regulator, you're naturally gravitating towards the threat vector. The our act, the OSFI Act, the act that established OSFI, gives us instructions, and the instructions are: here are the threats to the industry, which would in turn become threats to Canada, and so you need OSFI. You exist to help the institutions or ensure the institutions are managing those threats. The truth is, there's both opportunity and threat associated with technology, and disruption is a good word because disruption can create opportunity or it can create damage.
It can create
Amazon,
an opportunity for good or an opportunity for problems.
Amazon is a great innovation that ultimately came about as a result of the rise of the internet.
Yes.
Encyclopedia Britannica is the flip side of it, right? The music industry is another example of technology fundamentally altering the economics of that business. And so we're not here to regulate responses to those challenges. We're here to ensure that the boards at the institutions we oversee have a vibrant process in place for thinking about the risk and the opportunity of disruption, and to lead their institutions in a manner that lessens the risks and capitalizes or furthers the opportunity.
So when you have conversations with the insurance industry, and obviously you're dealing with all channels of it, not just P&C, but we'll focus on PSC right now. Are you finding there is good dialogue for worst case scenarios and how your office sees managing this and the outcomes of them and the responsibility of those entities? And are they addressing things and bringing things forward that you need to consider that maybe you haven't considered? Who's leading, without saying it this way, is it a cooperative step forward with industry to address future problems? Yeah,
I would say climate risk is a good way to answer that question. It's a good example to use. And here's in climate risk, and the work we've done has been really a partnership and a collaboration between my office, between the Bank of Canada, and between industry participants. And the work we're doing in concert is trying to sort through this big idea called climate risk and narrow analytical work down to, well, how will it affect the capitalization of individual institutions? And from a standing start, that's pretty hard to do. We have the expertise from the bank in terms of financial modeling, got the expertise from OSFI in terms of understanding the institutions and what their business models are, and then we have the expertise of the institutions who are competing and dealing with the threats from climate risk. And the work we did a climate risk scenario a couple years ago with the bank, and we worked through that scenario with a number of the institutions we regulate. We're doing more work around flood, which is a similar model, and we'll do work on wildfire, and not as officially. I'd like to do more work around earthquake with the industry, with IBC, with PASIC, in order to understand this sort of very serious but undefined risk, undefined in the sense we haven't had a major earthquake yet, quite some time. And yet is a good way to phrase that.
As someone who's originally grew up in Vancouver and still has a fair share of interest there in terms of friends and family, I always think about that and what could happen given some of the other financial challenges we're seeing in the market. But when you look at the P&C industry, do you have a wish list of things you'd like to see it evolve to ensure a positive outcome? Are there things that you hope that the industry comes forward with that your office says, hey, this would be a great idea, we'd love to see this?
So I guess I'd have a couple answers to that. First of all, I'm I grew up in North Vancouver. So
Oh, okay. Well, there we go.
And I have the same concern, and I have
The safe
family
side.
and loved ones there, and I know how important it is that we get earthquake risk management right.
Yes.
In terms of what we can hope for from the industry, if they want to, and actually, earthquake is a good example, I think, of the industry being constructively engaging with government to flag a longer-term threat to the country. And I think that's a really good example of constructive, positive engagement with the public service on a risk of national interest. And that would be a good, if you said, well, how should the industry proactively engage with government? That would be a really good example. We've set up a pretty, and we hear it quite frequently from our regulated constituents, a pretty ambitious regulatory agenda. And we want to hear, the first thing we want to hear is when that agenda might seem like it's too aggressive in too short a period of time. No promises that we'll agree on that diagnosis, but a promise always to listen and try and adapt in a sensible, prudent way. And then within each issue we're dealing with on the agenda, unvarnished, straight points of view are more helpful to us than opaque, indirect suggestions. I think in the back and forth between regulator, a spirit of disagreeing agreeably is a good guiding principle.
It sort of leads to more constructive outcomes.
Yeah.
You have to get through the hard conversations to get to the positive outcomes.
Yeah.
One last question about regulation. As the regulator and such in the Office for All of Canada and financial institutions, do you have relationships and interactions with the provinces, which have their own provincial regulations around stuff? And how is that dynamic for you?
In all provinces and territories, organizations like OSFI that are charged by their legislative assemblies and their governments of regulating the provincial entities that operate in the provincial space. We have a federal system, and some parts of our federal system require federal oversight, and other parts provincial oversight. We have made, and I'm not saying that we're finished or we've checked a box here, but we have made concerted efforts to participate formally in federal provincial forums and informally via proactive engagement with provincial authorities to understand what they're doing, and most importantly to understand if we're contemplating a change to a particular guideline or introducing a new guideline. We want to make sure whatever we do doesn't inadvertently make the job of a provincial regulator more difficult. We don't engage with provincial regulators in how they do regulation of their constituents. That's their jurisdiction, and we respect it. But what we try and have an eye on is, okay, if we're going to do B15, which is the climate risk guideline, what might that mean for regulators in different provinces? And we hopefully, if we do well, we engage proactively through both formal and informal channels. So an example is, it's not in the insurance space, but an example of the informal is during the mini crisis in banking we had in March and April of this year. I was on the phone with my counterparts across the country just to understand, to help them improve their situational awareness, and then to hear from them so I could improve my situational awareness. And the good news was the country absorbed that shock quite well, both at the federal space and the provincial space. But the act of reaching out and trying to help each other through is really valuable.
Absolutely. Peter, thank you very much for sitting down with us and having a chat after your chat on stage. Yeah. And we look forward to seeing what the office comes out with, some of the reports you mentioned, and continue success and collaboration with the insurance industry.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very welcome.